Like many people on BookTube, I have a problem. What's up, y'all? My name is Jess, and I'm here to get rid of books. Now, my collection by no means is the biggest one on YouTube, but it's definitely not small. It was a hassle to move, that's for sure. And in having to pack up my books and unpack them when I moved, I came to the realization that there are so many books on my shelves that I can't even remember if I liked them. There are even some books on my shelves that I'm pretty sure that I didn't like when I read them, and yet I still kept them, which begs the question, why did I waste my time and effort lugging these books that I don't necessarily like 700 plus miles to a new home? I really don't know, and I'd like to not have to do that the next time I move. Cue the very first episode of what I'm going to call Purging My Shelves. I'm going to read all of the books on my shelves that I'm not already 100% confident that I love and want to keep. For this round of Purging My Shelves, I wanted to keep with the spooky vibes of Halloween, so I'm going to be going through and reading the paranormal books that I have on my shelves. Let's just jump right in and get started, because I can already feel that this one's going to be a long one. First up, we have The Witch by Marianne Mitchell. This book follows Stephen, a 5-year-old boy who recently lost his mother. His mom's spirit, however, is still lingering and guides Stephen to the basement where he finds a box etched with demons. With the use of these new demonic powers, it's now up to Stephen to punish all of the people who hurt his mom while she was living. From what I can remember, this book did spook me out when I first read it, so I'm hoping it'll still spook me out and scare me, but we'll see. Next up, I actually have a trilogy to get through, the Mara Dyer series. This being the first book, The Unbecoming of Mara Dyer. Yes, I am aware there is a sticker on it. Yes, that does annoy me. We live with what we've got. The Unbecoming of Mara Dyer was actually a pretty popular series on BookTube when it first came out, so many of you probably already know what it's about, but in case you don't, this series follows Mara Dyer, who woke up in the hospital with no memory of the accident that killed all of her friends. I really don't remember much beyond that. I know a lot of the intrigue came from the fact that Mara Dyer was an unreliable narrator. I don't actually remember if there's a paranormal aspect to this book, but Goodreads says there is, so I'm gonna trust that. If my memory serves me, I did actually enjoy the series, so hopefully this will be a fun reread. Next up, we have Prophecy of the Sisters by Michelle Zink. In this book, twin sisters Leah and Alice have recently been orphaned. An ancient prophecy has also come to light, predicting that one sister will be good while the other is evil. For generations, this prophecy has been tearing apart sisters, and it looks like it'll be doing the same thing to Leah and Alice. I literally remember nothing about this book. I bought this when I was a kid. I honestly want to say that I bought it at like the Scholastic Book Fair or something like that. Next is The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. Do I feel kind of bad having a Neil Gaiman on my possible purge list? A little bit. Kind of. Neil Gaiman is sometimes a hit or miss for me, and from what I remember, The Ocean at the End of the Lane was kind of a miss for me. This book follows a middle-aged man who has returned to his childhood town to attend a funeral. While he's there, he ends up going to a farm at the end of the road where he sits by the pond and reminisces on his childhood friend, Letty Hempstock. You know the spiel. I don't remember anything else about this. I think it's a lot of magical realism. When I know more, I'll say more. Next is The Illustrated Man by Ray Bradbury. Before I get into the plot, let me just say, I love this cover. I really love this edition of the book. For the cover alone, I might consider keeping it, and I'm pretty sure that's why I've kept it so far. I need to get over it and stop keeping books just for the aesthetic. The Illustrated Man is a classic, so you may have already heard of it. The book is actually a collection of short stories. However, the premise is that each story is being told by tattoos that are covering the body of a wanderer known as the Illustrated Man. The short stories range from sci-fi to fantasy to horror. Typically, I don't really enjoy anthologies, so that's probably why I don't have fond memories of this book, but maybe now that I'm older and my tastes have broadened a little bit, maybe it'll hit different. Next on the list is Vanished by Meg Cabot. This is actually a bind-up of the first 2 books of the 1-800-Where-Are-You series. In this series, we follow the main character named Jess. Jess, a high school student, is struck by lightning and suddenly finds that she has the ability to locate missing children. It sounds intriguing, but from what I remember, I didn't really like the writing style of this book. I found it kind of bland, I guess. And if I thought that when I first read it, I can't imagine that my opinion will get any better, but maybe. The next book is also a bind-up, Kissed by an Angel by Elizabeth Chandler. This is a bind-up of the entire trilogy. In this series, Ivy is grieving the loss of her boyfriend Tristan, who passed away in a car accident. Unbeknownst to her, Tristan has actually come back as an angel and is watching over Ivy while they slowly discover that this car accident may not have actually been an accident. This book is heavy on the romance. I find that I care less and less about romance as I get older. I don't know why, but Next, we have Hocus Pocus and the all-new sequel written by A.W. Jantha. I feel absolutely horrible having this book on my possible purge list. This book was based off the classic Halloween movie, Hocus Pocus. I love the movie, so when this book came out, I was super excited, immediately got it, and was immediately kind of disappointed. The first part of this book actually recounts the events of the movie, so you're following Max as he accidentally releases 3 witches known as the Sanderson sisters, and then has to figure out how to lock them up again so that they don't destroy the town of Salem. The second part of the book happens 25 years later and follows Max and Allison's daughter, Poppy. Like father, like daughter, the Sanderson sisters get released, and it's up to Poppy and her friends to figure out how to combat the Sanderson sisters and stop them. It's probably my own fault for coming into this book with pretty high expectations. I was pretty disappointed. It just wasn't... It just didn't do it for me, but I have a lot of nostalgia for the movie, so I would absolutely feel horrible giving this book up, so I'm giving it another shot to wow me. Next up, we have Time of the Witches by Anna Meyers. Now, this book I definitely bought at the Scholastic Book Fair, so you know this one's an old one. This story takes place in Salem around the time of the witch trials. Our main character, Drusilla, was orphaned as a child and then adopted by the Putnam family. When a new family moves into town, accusations of witchcraft start popping up everywhere. The town descends into madness, and Drusilla, pressured by the lies and actions of the other girls in town, also starts making some accusations. I'm pretty sure this book is considered a middle grade, and as much as I want to love middle grade, I kind of have a hard time enjoying it, so unless this book is really spectacular, I don't think it's gonna be for me. Alright, the final book, The Seer of Shadows by Avi. This book takes place in 19th century New York City. We're following Horace, who is a photography apprentice and is tasked with taking the portrait of the wealthy Mrs. Von Mock. The photos, however, reveal the image of her dead daughter, Eleonora. As the story progresses, Horace finds out exactly how Eleonora died and realizes that his photographs may be helping Eleonora return as a vengeful spirit. Again, I'm pretty sure this is a middle grade book. The plot sounds intriguing to me, and I'm hoping that I do actually enjoy it. So those are all the books that I'm going to be reading. There are some books on this list that I'm super excited to get to, and I'm hoping will result in a rediscovered love that I have forgotten about. I'm gonna start reading, and I'll get back to you on that. Welcome to the very first clip of this reading vlog. Kind of goes without saying that I have never vlogged before, so go easy on me. I decided to start at the bottom of the list because I figured those books are the ones I'm most likely to get rid of, so let me just get it out of the way. I've actually already read 2 of the books. I'm sorry. So yesterday I started and finished Time of the Witches by Anna Meyers. That same night I started The Seer of Shadows by Avi, which I finished this morning while I was having breakfast. I would have been a good YouTuber and vlogged yesterday. My boyfriend and I decided to drive to a DC and walk around the National Mall, so most of the reading that I did was on the drive to and from DC. So yeah, we're going strong already, went through these books, and just as I thought would happen, I'm getting rid of both of them. Both of these books are middle grade books, and middle grade tends to be really hit or miss for me, veering more on the side of miss, so I wasn't shocked. For Time of the Witches by Anna Meyers, the book was okay, it was entertaining, I didn't really have any problem with it. The writing was more telling versus showing, which I'm not a huge fan of, and honestly there are so many books surrounding the Salem witch trials, there are better options. I will say though, from what I can tell, The Time of the Witches is pretty historically accurate, so if you have a kid or somebody younger who has just heard about the Salem witch trials and kind of wants an introduction, Time of the Witches is a decent introduction because it gives you a basic overview of what happened. It's pretty clear from the very beginning that the accusations are all false and are a result of either lies or groupthink or pressure, whatever. So, my first paranormal read was not actually paranormal. After finishing The Time of the Witches, I moved on to The Seer of Shadows. I should have known from the very beginning that I was gonna get rid of this book. Why, you may ask? Because apparently I earmarked page 61, which kind of implies that I never finished the book in the first place. The book isn't terrible, don't get me wrong. It's a similar situation with The Time of the Witches. It was okay. The main topic of this book is spiritual photography and the idea that photography is linked to the spirit. I'm sure there are better books on the topic that will keep my attention more than this did. There have been middle grades in the past that have entertained me, so I know this isn't just that I don't like middle grade writing. That's not it. This book just didn't really hold hold my attention for very long. There were kind of long descriptions of how photography works and the science and the chemistry behind it, which if you're interested in that sort of thing, great. Personally, I don't know how much I cared for it. Also, this book takes place in the late 19th century, so be prepared for some racist comments. Most of the knowledge that the main character gets about what happened to the daughter and what's going on in this household came from the 13-year-old servant, Peg. Peg is black. He himself never treats Peg any differently or says anything of any sort to her. His boss is the one who makes most of the racist comments. The main character doesn't say or do anything. All you really get is his inner monologue where he's basically just shaking his head at his boss's views. Just kind of feels like Peg was being used to make the main character look like a better person. So I wasn't a fan of that, and I'm getting rid of it. Now y'all are caught up to where I am in the reading. Next, I'm going to be starting Hocus Pocus and the all-new sequel. I just looked at my Goodreads score of this, and I rated this book 2 stars the first time I read it. My hopes are not high. So I just finished the first part of the book where it's just a retelling of the movie plot, and I kind of loved it. I don't know, it might be that when this book first came out, it was so overhyped that by the time I actually read it, it just didn't meet my expectations. But now going into it, my expectations were so low that I kind of enjoyed it. It's definitely not sophisticated writing, but I also have to keep in mind it's not written for my age group. It's written for a younger demographic. And with that in mind, it was pretty fun. I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I think I'm probably going to keep it. I'm 20 pages into part 2, and now I remember why I didn't like it in the first place. Let's start with the fact that all of a sudden you go from third person to first person writing, and I don't know why, and I'm not a fan of it. I don't particularly like first person writing, and the only way I can ignore it is if the writing overall is really good, and this writing really is bland. Something about part 2 just hits all of my pet peeves. You got the first person perspective, you have every character's outfit described, and I'm talking described as in they're saying, today I wore a red shirt and black jeans, and I'm like, why? Why do I care? I'm all for having details, but why are you writing it like that? I don't understand. I feel like the reason I kept this book in the first place was for 2 reasons. 1, the nostalgia factor, and 2, Poppy, the main character of part 2, who's the daughter of Allison and Max, is LGBT. But that's not a good enough reason to keep it. I love queer representation, but at what cost? So I just finished Hocus Pocus, and I am going to keep it, but I had a huge internal debate. If it was just part 1, no question, I'd keep it. If it was just part 2, I would get rid of this book. Part 1 was great. It matched the vibe of the movie perfectly. It had the same atmosphere. It reminded me of the movie so much, and the nostalgia factor was amazing. And I love that in the retelling of the story, the characters are fleshed out a bit more. You do get to hear Max's thoughts and Winifred's thoughts, and you get to know their motivations a bit more. But I had quite a few issues with part 2. None of the issues are super serious, but overall I kind of just found the writing lackluster, and I didn't really enjoy the plotline either. It also felt like this author was trying way too hard to appeal to young people. As an example of that, one of the characters in this book loves puns. I love puns as much as the next person, but the fact that this character had a pun what felt like every page was excessive. It was tiring after the first 2 or 3. There were also other questionable writing choices that didn't add to the plot at all and just left me confused. There was a whole musical number, and I'm not talking like Sarah's hypnotizing song that she uses to draw in the children. There was one character who burst into song out of nowhere, went through her musical number, and then stopped singing. It was never addressed, and it literally only happened that one time. I fully don't understand why that was ever a part of the book. I will say that I did enjoy how fleshed out the Sanderson sisters were. You get to learn more about their past and how they grew up and why they are the way that they are. And I'm not going to say that you necessarily sympathize with them and their goals, but you understand them a bit more and you start to feel sorry for them. There's also a great message in part 2 about how everyone is more than just a one-dimensional good guy or bad guy. But overall, part 2 felt more like it was fan fiction rather than an extension of the original Hocus Pocus world. I'm still going to be keeping it though. The nostalgia is pretty strong. I do think that middle school age age children and younger would probably enjoy this book. I will say though, there are sexual jokes throughout this book. If you remember the movie well, you'll probably remember some of the jokes, especially those concerning Sarah, the blonde Sanderson sister. Personally, I think those jokes will fly over the heads of younger kids, but if you're a parent and you're thinking of maybe getting this book for your kid, I would check it out and decide for yourself. The general mood for this vlog is... I managed to finish Kissed by an Angel this morning. At first, I liked the romance between our main character, Ivy, and her boyfriend, Tristan, the one who passed away. Take this with a grain of salt, though. I don't read romances often, if at all, so currently my standards for a well-written love story is pretty low. But I did find their love story heartwarming, and there was this dramatic, tragic tone to it that I loved. I don't know if I actually like the romance, or if I'm just a big fan of heartbreak and, like, sad emotions, but at first, I did like the atmosphere that was being built around their love story. As the story progressed, however, not so much. Now, I don't think the author Elizabeth Chandler intended for Tristan to come off as creepy. I don't think she meant for it to be a problematic thing. I think she intended more for Tristan to come across as just so in love with Ivy that he can't imagine anyone else being the one meant for her. Tristan adamantly refuses that there may even be a possibility of other guys having feelings for Ivy or vice versa. And then he goes so far as to do some things that I found pretty insensitive and kind of manipulative, all in the name of getting Ivy to distance herself from other boys who might have feelings for her. Granted, Tristan has some growth towards the end, but overall I just found this obsessive, and it was weird to me, especially considering their relationship lasted a couple months, if that. I liked reading about Tristan as an angel. They're essentially just ghosts, but the author's take on their powers and how they work was kind of interesting. When it comes to mysteries and thrillers, I personally try to refrain from guessing the end. I don't actually want to guess what's going to happen in the ending. I want to be mind blown, and I was absolutely not with this ending. The author does try to mislead you, and I did consider other options for who the murderer was, but when the ending was revealed, I wasn't shocked. It felt like an ending that I've read 100 times before and will probably read 100 times more. For now, I'm probably going to put this book in the unhaul pile, but my opinion might change by the time I finish with this video. After finishing Kissed by an Angel, I picked up Vanished. I got through 70 pages of this book, but it took like 2 pages for me to realize that I was gonna get rid of it. Not only is the main character, Jess, annoying as all hell, but it also felt like the author took a list of all possible ways to offend people and then just started checking off boxes. Let me recap this for you, okay? Page 4, literally the beginning of the book, you start off with Jess's best friend Ruth being body shamed for being overweight. This is only the beginning of body shaming that continues throughout the 70 pages that I read. Now page 17 is where the classism really starts. You find out that the high school is divided into 2 types of people, the townies and the grits, which before we even get into what those categories mean is weird as hell. But essentially, the townies are all of the rich people, and the grits are the people who live in the rural parts. Ruth proceeds to talk about a guy who is a grit and says, and I quote, "He is definitely not college bound. Prison bound maybe." And then you find out that Jess is only allowed to date college bound boys, aka townies. So essentially, if your parents are farmers or factory workers, or you're poor, you're a delinquent in detention and you're destined for prison instead of college. Which is so problematic without even considering the fact that college does not determine your value and it's not the right path for everyone. But let's continue. Page 35 is where you're introduced to a side character named Claire, and where you find out that Jess's brothers are disgusting because they like to spy on Claire when she's sunbathing, or in the case of Jess's oldest brother, likes to use his binoculars to look into Claire's window when she's probably changing. And then you move forward to page 40, where you're hit with some derogatory slurs for people with disabilities. On the very next page, you find out that Jess's oldest brother, Douglas, attempted to commit suicide. Not only does it come out of nowhere, it is spoken about so callously. The way Meg Cabot wrote about this and the following events and consequences of it was disgustingly insensitive. I'm genuinely upset and angry about it. But we're gonna continue because the offensiveness does not stop there. Homophobia gets introduced on page 42. This book kind of dates itself because you can tell it was written in the era when the word gay was used to insult pretty much everything. I'm sure the offensiveness continues throughout the entire book, but I'm really not interested in finding out what other boxes Meg Cabot decided to check off that list. I barely got into the paranormal aspect of this book, and I don't even care. It's not worth it. And I am so damn glad that I decided to take on this task of rereading the books on my shelves, because I'm doing it for shit like this. Because it is totally possible that there is more offensive shit on my shelves, and I'm not here for it. Hopefully Prophecy of the Sisters by Michelle Zink will do better. If this vlog turns out boring, it'll be because all of the books I have read so far have done nothing but bore me. That's the sad, honest truth. So I just finished The Prophecy of the Sisters by Michelle Zink, and it was okay, as was every other book that I have read so far. My arm got tired, so we're gonna lean on the desk now. To be fair, The Prophecy of the Sisters is not that bad. I think I might just be too old for the demographic that this book was meant for. I found it really simplistic. I wasn't surprised by any of the plot twists. Honestly, pretty much every time the character ran into a problem or a confusion or whatever, I pretty much instantly already knew where this was gonna go and what the solution would be, and I was just waiting for her to catch up. And on top of that, the plot all just felt very convenient. The main character didn't have to work very hard to get all of the information she needed to understand her role in the prophecy. The main character just felt boring. She felt really one-dimensional. It felt like everything was handed to her. I will say that I did enjoy the paranormal aspect of it. A prophecy about twins isn't that unique, let's be real. But the way that prophecy manifested and the powers that came along with it, I did find interesting. I feel like the author has potential. The Prophecy of the Sisters is the first book in a series. I'm not personally going to continue in the series. I'm going to unhaul this book, but I don't necessarily want to discourage people from picking this up if they find the premise interesting. Now we're moving on to the books that I think I might still like. So I'm on page 60 of The Ocean at the End of the Lane. If you've read this book before, Ursula's just been introduced. And why am I getting a little spooked? My memory of reading this book the first time around wasn't good. I really didn't like it. I didn't vibe with it. I think I just didn't read it at the right time. And now is a better time for me to read this. This book was amazing. It was absolutely the right time for me to read this book. I loved the story of this book. I thought all of the magic was unique and eerie, perfect for the spooky season. All of the magical aspects that surrounded the Hemstock specifically felt beyond comprehension. The foundation of the magic in this world was too large for me to wrap my head around. It was just unlike any other magic system that I've read about before. Neil Gaiman's writing was so atmospheric. I really felt like I was in this world. I felt like I was in the mind of the narrator. I was scared when the narrator was scared. I was nostalgic when he was nostalgic. Every time I picked this up, I could feel my mood shift into the mood that this book was trying to elicit. I also really loved the characters. This is one of the very few times that I've genuinely enjoyed reading from the perspective of a kid. I thought when we picked up this book, we would get more of the middle-aged perspective, but the majority of the book is actually the narrator recounting events that happened when he was about 7 years old. You do get a lot of his reflections as a full-grown adult, though, and I think that's probably why I enjoyed reading this, where normally I wouldn't enjoy reading from a kid's perspective. I also think those reflections are probably what didn't do it for me when I first read this book, but what absolutely did it for me this time. Some of these quotes, these reflections just hit me right where it hurt. Let me just read one of my favorite quotes to you. I do not miss childhood, but I miss the way I took pleasure in small things, even as greater things crumbled. I could not control the world I was in, could not walk away from things or people or moments that hurt, but I found joy in the things that made me happy. I felt so called out with that quote. I really did. Ocean at the End of the Lane was wonderful. I want to be adopted by the Hemstocks. That's it. This will probably be the high point of this entire video. A part of me really just wanted to stop right there. Like, that's it. I don't need to read any more of these books. Let me just bask in these post-reading feelings. But I have a goal here, so I needed to keep going. And I decided to pick up The Illustrated Man by Ray Bradbury afterwards. I'm a few short stories in, and so far it's going pretty well. The ones that I've read go by pretty quickly, and I've enjoyed them. I really like the sinister tone that all of them have. Ray Bradbury kind of hones in real close to the situation, and then when you're peak unsettled, zooms back out, simultaneously giving you a little bit of relief, but mostly just making you sit in that discomfort. After Ocean at the End of the Lane, I just really want the rest of this video to go well. I want the rest of these books to be amazing. I need to end on a high note. So welcome back to my cozy reading corner. I finished reading The Illustrated Man. It went by pretty quickly. I like Bradbury's writing style. I like how he kind of builds this scene, says what needs to be said, but then leaves room for your own assumptions. I feel like it makes it way more eerie and spooky. I especially enjoyed his approach to sci-fi. I find that adult sci-fi tends to be kind of hit or miss for me, mostly because some authors tend to explain all of the science and all of the technology in minute detail. Some people love that, but personally, when I'm faced with a lot of jargon and technical explanations, I just get bored, and I appreciate that Bradbury doesn't do that. In his world, the science just is, the technology just is. It just exists, and you just accept it. The short stories in the beginning of this book are probably my favorites. The Long Rain is probably my favorite. That short story follows this crew that's been stranded on Venus where it rains nonstop, and they're in search of a shelter to get them out of this rain. Unfortunately, I started getting a little disinterested after that. The short stories started getting longer, and they didn't hold my attention as much. Still, I thought the quality of this book and all of the short stories were really good. I really love the premise of The Illustrated Man, and I would read an entire book about him specifically. This book, however, I don't think I'll ever read it cover to cover again, but I think at most I'll just read a story here and there if I ever need a break from novels. Next up, I'm going to be starting the Mara Dyer series, the first book being The Unbecoming of Mara Dyer. It's a new day, I'm about halfway through this, and it's looking like another 3-star read for me. We love to see it. It's definitely been an easy read so far, but I feel like I'm still waiting for it to really get started. We've had some weird dark stuff happen, but most of the book so far has just been talking between characters and Mara's budding relationship with Noah and not much else. And speaking of Noah, remembering my teen years, I understand why Mara is so drawn to him, but I feel like Michelle Hodkins could have done a better job of making the reader also feel infatuated with him. It feels like there's still distance between the reader and Noah. We don't really know anything about him. He still has his bad boy persona, and it's just making it really hard for me to care about him. I fully don't understand why Mara's brother is so supportive of their relationship. There was one moment where it felt like the author was trying to make Noah out to be super caring, and it just didn't land well for me. Mara is telling Noah about how she feels like she's going insane and that there's nothing anyone can do to fix it. Noah's response to that is, "Let me try." And I just didn't like the implications of that. I didn't like that it was making it out to seem like people with mental illnesses are broken and need to be fixed. And I especially don't like the idea that relationships can be built on trying to fix each other. That being said, this does read like a genuine teen relationship. To be quite fair, all of the teen characters have pretty authentic dialogue. These characters curse and they banter and they gossip and they make inappropriate jokes and just talk like high school students would. I also really like the depiction of Mara's trauma so far, which is a really weird sentence to say. But basically, I just appreciate that Mara went through something terrible and it's not just being brushed off. I don't have personal experience with PTSD, so I can't actually speak on the authenticity of its depiction, but I do feel like the author put some research into how PTSD can manifest. I also love that Mara's parents are being proactive. They signed her up for therapy, and they even moved to an entirely new state because they listened to her when she said that she needed a fresh start. It's so refreshing to get parents in books that actually listen to their children. I just finished filming my September wrap-up, and I decided to pop in and update you guys on how I'm doing. I ended up finishing The Unbecoming of Mara Dyer last night, and I'm a bit on the fence about this. The action and the mystery vibes picked up right after I started reading again, which I'm grateful for, but I was a little confused at first. The plotline just feels disjointed to me. It was more romance than mental instability like I was hoping for, but I'm holding out judgment on whether or not I'll keep this until I've finished the entire series. I liked the premise, so I'm hoping that I'll get what I was looking for in the next book. Before I move on though, there were a few things that I was a little iffy about in this book, but I specifically wanted to talk about the scene where Noah and Mara encounter Santeria. I was kind of uncomfortable with the depiction of Santeria in this book. Some of my family practices Santeria, and I'm familiar with the religion to an extent. My guard is always thrown up when Santeria is depicted in popular media because it's so often shown as something that's dark and violent and scary and crazy even. We don't have enough time to go into detail about the racist foundation of those depictions, but needless to say, they're one-dimensional and they're biased, and they so often come from people who know nothing about it. I don't know that I would say the depiction of Santeria in this book was overtly bad, but it was edging on something violent and dark, and Mara's reaction to it wasn't the kindest. To be fair, it was probably an accurate reaction for someone who's never encountered or heard anything about the religion, but something about it just made me hesitate. It felt like they were using Santeria to make the plotline seem darker and spookier, and I don't appreciate that implication because it is a rich culture and religion and it should be respected and treated as more than that. But at this point, I am committed to finishing the series, so we'll see how it goes from here. I'm about halfway through the evolution of Mara Dyer. You can really tell that unemployment is freeing up my time here because I've been flying through all of the books in this video. I'm liking this one more than I liked the first book, but I'm still on the fence about keeping this series. You do get more of Mara being an unreliable narrator, which I like. Now I'm actually starting to question what's true, what's not, what's just in Mara's imagination, and what she might be doing herself. I do also care more about Noah. Like, he's starting to grow on me. I'm starting to understand why people care so much about him because he really is just trying his best to support Mara and help. I just don't know how I feel about how the paranormal aspect of this book is developing. That's where I am right now. Y'all, I'm so conflicted about this series. This book is definitely better than the first one. It's more interesting. I was more spooked and unsettled about what was happening with Mara. Admittedly, I kind of care about Noah now. There's a section in the book where you really get to hear Noah's inner thoughts and you get to know him more as a person. Do I feel like he's a little bit obsessive and it's weird how far he's willing to go for Mara considering he's only really known her for a few months? Yes. But this is a teen romance, so whatever. The plot is starting to feel more cohesive, but I'm still on the fence about this explanation, premise, whatever, of what's causing everything. And I feel like I'm probably still gonna be on the fence until I finish this entire series and I have all the answers. Right now, whether or not I keep the series is fully hinging on the last book, because I don't know. I'm not leaning one way or another. There we go. No, buddy. Don't lay on the books. Please don't lay on the books. No, I need this. Thank you. I finished the last book. I didn't really vlog while I was reading it because honestly my feelings are the same for this one as they were for the second one, so I really didn't have much to say about it. What I will say is that the second and third books were definitely better than the first. No competition there for me. There was more urgency, there was more action, overall a faster pace. I really like that this book doesn't hold back from having its characters do some really dark and violent things. You really have to ask yourself if Mara's genuinely a good person or not. When I finished the second book, I was kind of on the fence about the cause of all the paranormal things in this book. Once you get all of the information in this last book, it makes more sense. It's a bit more cohesive, but I also feel like it was just way too convoluted. There were quite a few layers to the issue, and at some point just started feeling way too thrown together for me. I feel like it could have been simplified and made stronger. I also didn't really like the ending. I wanted more resolution. I wanted more of the loose strings to be tied up. Like, I wanted to hear from the parents at the end of this. I spent the entire trilogy waiting to find out if Mara's parents would ever find out the truth, and if they did, what would they say to it? Like, how would they react? We didn't get that at all. It was a bit of a letdown because that was seriously one of the things I was most looking forward to in the ending. Still, this is one of the darker YAs that I have, and I did genuinely enjoy watching Mara mentally unravel. I'm questioning if my indecision is based solely on my feelings about the trilogy, or if I'm being influenced by the fact that the Mara Dyer trilogy is like a staple in the booktube community. But right now, I think I'm gonna keep the trilogy. And now we're finally on to the last one. If any of you guessed that this video was not going to end on a high note, you were right. It took me all of 30 pages to decide that I am uncomfortable with this book. What I'm about to share isn't really a spoiler, like it's on the back of the book and it happens super early. But if you don't want to hear any more of the plot than what it's already been told, just skip ahead. So you find out that Stephen's father, Jacob, had an affair with the babysitter. Now, I hate affairs as is, but it gets worse. The babysitter is 17 years old. We don't know Jacob's age, but it's safe to assume he's at least in his late 20s, if not early 30s. I don't think I need to say that that's messed up. It just is. It's inappropriate. By the time the book starts, the affair is over, so maybe I would be more okay with it if it was just addressed how inappropriate it is, but they don't do that. They basically just focus on the fact that Jacob cheated at all, and they don't make any mention of the fact like, hey, you cheated with an underage girl. And Jacob is super gross when referring to it too. At one point, he literally says that he's going to raise her salary because she's missing out on one of the benefits of the job now. I gagged. The abuse of power is disgusting enough, but then you add on the arrogance of him thinking that sleeping with him is a benefit of the job, and I'm just like, that ain't it for me. At another point, the babysitter is being replaced, and Jacob decides to pay her an extra week's worth of money as a bonus, saying that, and I quote, She was worth every penny. What? So I'm grossed out and uncomfortable, and that whole relationship is inappropriate, and the book doesn't seem to see the age difference or abuse of power as an issue. I'm going to finish the book because I want to know if it's as spooky as I remember, but like this is pretty much almost immediately going to go into the unhaul pile. I'm 100% getting rid of this. It wasn't nearly as scary or spooky as I hoped for. The one positive thing I can say is that the demons were interesting. In this book, demons are ancient creatures that continuously find new bodies and things to inhabit, and their bodies in this were clay figures that Stephen's mother used to trap them. You get little tidbits of their past lives when they're talking to each other, and I honestly would have read an entire book on their past lives rather than this. It just wasn't scary. It didn't feel like there was any buildup, so all of the events in this kind of fell flat for me. I also wasn't a fan of the writing style. It felt really amateur. If a character was feeling guilty, for instance, the author would literally just write, "He felt guilty." The dialogue was also unrealistic. Stephen is 5 years old throughout this book, maximum 6 by the time the book ends. Sometimes he'll talk like a kid, and then other times he's using words like cowering, and he's getting philosophical about moral issues. It's not realistic. No 5-year-old would talk like that, and it pulled me out of the story every single time. I got none of the things that I was hoping for in this book, and then you have the added grossness of the inappropriate relationship between Jacob and the babysitter, and you have the frankly horrible things that are said about Stephen's mom, for one, because she was depressed and they basically showed her no support for that. And two, the gross things that were said about Stephen's cousin, who is wheelchair bound. This book was just kind of gross. I wasn't about it. If I want to be scared, I can do so much better than this. If you've stuck around this long, bless your soul, because this was a bit of a long video. I hope you enjoyed my very first experience vlogging and getting to meet my beautiful children. I read, or attempted to read, 12 books for this, and I am unhauling exactly half of them. I am going to put this down now because this is difficult, and like I've mentioned before, I need to go to the gym. The books I've decided to unhaul are The Witch, Kissed by an Angel, Vanished, Time of the Witches, The Seer of Shadows, and The Prophecy of Sisters. I will be keeping The Illustrated Man, Hocus Pocus and the all-new sequel, the Mara Dyer trilogy, although this one is on thin ice, so... and The Ocean at the End of the Lane, which may be one of my favorite reads of the year, to be honest. Honestly, y'all, I'm really proud of myself for actually letting go of some of these books. I didn't think I would decide to unhaul as many of these as I did, because these have been my emotional support books for literally my entire life, but it's a step in the right direction towards having a collection that I'm actually 100% obsessed with and proud of. This video had quite the range of emotions, and I'm so glad I decided to do this experiment, I guess. Either way, I am going to continue going through the books on my shelves, so be on the lookout for the next episode of Purging My Shelves. If you've read any of the books in this video and you agree or disagree with my choices, please comment below and let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts. In the meantime, like, comment, subscribe, you know the deal. I'll see you in the next one.